So following on from chapter 7 and 8, okay, which was layers and properties, we're going to look at layout today, okay? So this is basically where you're going to prepare and annotate all of your drawings for printing later, and you'll put scale views of your drawings there, and you'll construct a basic plan, something you may have seen already by now. So I've got AutoCAD open here, and I've got some stuff that I've drawn and I've put it into different layers, and I've given it different line types and stuff like that from the following chapters. So I'm going to use that as an example today for working in layout. So far you've been working in what I've just been referring to as the drawing space, okay, or model space as AutoCAD describes it, and we'll talk a little bit more about that just now. But essentially you've been drawing on this model tab here, okay, down at the bottom, and this is what I would call the drawing space or the model space. It's this dark colored background, although you can choose another color if you want, but by default it's like this, and it's the most comfortable for your eyes is to do all your drawing work like this, and then lay out your pages and layouts on these tabs over here. Okay, so that's the fundamental change that we deal with in chapter 9. Is we're not going to be working so much in this model tab. It's going to be about these two tabs here. Okay, layout. So when you start a new drawing, you will by default have probably one or two layouts, and they just call them layout 1 and layout 2, and think of them like pages. Okay, this is a page layout, and this is where you can construct your drawing and put your scale views in, and your notes and page number and logo and name and all that stuff. Okay, and you can do them tab by tab by tab, so each tab being a particular page that you would ultimately print, and so on and so forth. Okay, so we refer to this layout space also as paper space, and you'll see down here on the status bar there's an icon that lets you change between model and paper space. We'll discuss that just now, but for now just remember there's a distinction between working in model space here on the model tab and doing layouts, which is what we're covering in this chapter. So you'll see that I just clicked on the first of those tabs, okay, layout 1. That's just the default name that comes with AutoCAD. And what we're going to do first is we're going to jump into page setup, okay? Some people like to set this up last, but I think it makes sense to set it up first. So the way you can access page setup, okay, so we're going to set up this page, this layout, in other words. And the way we can access the page setup manager is by right-clicking down here on the layout tab, okay, right click, and then go to page setup manager. I can also go up here to the ribbon. You'll see that there is a layout section of the ribbon that has now appeared because we're working in layout space, and you can access page setup from clicking on this icon up here, or you could type the command, which is page setup, okay, page setup, enter. There we go. Doesn't matter how you got there, but you will see a screen like this open up, all right? And at the moment, it's created a page setup here that has just copied the same name as our layout, okay? So one key thing to note here is that the list that you see over here is the list of page setups, okay? It's not the same as the list of layouts. They look the same because the page setup manager takes its name from your layout name down here, okay? So if I close this and I change the layout name, and you can do this by right clicking on it, going to rename, let's call this page 1, okay? Page 1 Tim. Now if I right click on it and go to page setup, or however you choose to get there, okay, it's going to say page 1 Tim. You see, it's just copying the same name, but this is not the same as a layout. These are page setups, and you can create many page setups and you can assign them to different pages. So it's a little bit complicated at first, but when you start having multiple pages, then you understand why it's set up like this. Okay, so the thing to note here, okay, is you're going to have your different layouts. Right now I've just got this page 1 Tim sitting in there, and I can choose to modify this page setup, or I can create a new page setup that I can then apply to new layouts as I create them. So I'm going to modify this one here, and I'm going to do that by just going to the modify button on the side here. I can create a new one also, but for this sake, let's just do modify. Okay, so I'm going to change the page setup settings for this named page setup, okay, modify. Okay, so here we are on the page setup for this particular layout. And the first thing we're going to look at is our printer and plotter, okay. You'll see that there's a whole lot of different sections here. There's these little boxes that denotate these different areas of settings, because there's quite a few on this one. But the first one I'm going to look at is this one here, printer/plotter. Okay, so this is the name of the printer that you're actually going to be printing to. The same way if you were printing a Word document or something like that, you choose my Hewlett Packard XP 5000 or whatever. We're not actually going to print these things on paper and ink with ink. We're going to publish them to PDF, okay, or print them to PDF. So it's going to output a PDF file instead of an actual page with ink on it. So the one to select here from this list is DWG to PDF.PC3. Okay, that's the built-in one with AutoCAD that automatically does all the calculations in the background to give you a PDF at the end. Okay, so now that that is set, we're going to go to paper size, and this is where you can set up the page size that you want. Okay, so there's not a particular guideline to work with here, unless if you're doing a brief, if it's specified in the brief to use A3 or A2 or something like that, then you would choose it from this list. The printer, at least at the BHC campus, is A3. So that's the one I'm going to use, so that if I decide I did actually want a paper copy of it later, I would be able to print it here, and I wouldn't have to take it to some big special print shop that can print, A2, A1, A0, those giant poster sizes, because those are very common in the architectural and interior design industry to have big pages like that, but it's it's impractical to work with. So I'm going to choose an A3 page, okay, and you'll see that there's a huge selection here, and the one we're going to look for, and you'll see that there's often 2 entries for each one. The top one would be the landscape measurement, if the page was landscape format, and the second one would be portrait. So just take note of that. So we're going to scroll down here to, where is it? ISO full bleed A3, okay? ISO full bleed A3. 420.00 by 297.00, okay? So that's 420 millimeters wide by 297. It's basically 2 A4 pages, side to side, all right? You'll see that the preview now in this little block in this page setup window is changed to show 420 by 297, okay, based on what we chose here. So the next setting to tweak on this page here, okay, just make sure that your plot area is set to layout. We're not going to go into the other options. There are a few there, but just make sure it's on layout. All right, we're not going to go into plot offset either, but this would basically allow you to compensate for any sort of margins that are on the printer. Okay, but we're going to be doing it to PDF, so we don't need to worry about that at the moment. And plot scale, okay, you won't really want to change this. You can, and we will go over this again in chapter 11, but you'll basically be applying another scale on top of the one that you already have in layout, and it's just a bad idea. Okay, it gets confusing, so just make sure that it is always 1-to-1. Our plot style table you can just set to none at this point, and we'll discuss that again in chapter 11. And then just make sure that display plot styles is ticked though, and if not, I'll remind you again when we get there further down the road. And then you want to check plot object line weight. So this means that when you finally plot your line weights that you've set up in layers, etc., like we went through, will actually plot. Yeah, we will go through these settings all again when we get to actual plotting. Okay, and then don't worry about setting this to anything other than landscape, because we chose landscape here for the page. Okay, it's 420, that's the width. By 297 is the height. It's in landscape already. Okay, so some printers don't understand the difference between portrait and landscape, and so you can specify it here. Just make sure that whatever you specify here is also matching here, just as good practice, even though most printers will disregard that setting and check for what you've set here instead. Okay, so now that we've gone through those things, and just the top ones being choosing the correct output there, the PDF, choosing our page size, making sure that's layout, making sure that says 1-to-1. Okay, then we just click OK, and you'll see now that it made a small change in the background there, and it has now updated my page setup. Okay, now if I click close, so you'll see when we close the page setup manager, it's given us this new A3 size page. All right, and what it's left behind, and it was there before we did the page setup, was this frame, okay, containing a picture of our modeling area, okay, our model space. And this frame is what's referred to as viewport, okay. So these are, you can place multiple ones inside a layout, and we'll get into that later. But this is where you place the scaled views of your drawing, okay? So you can have an elevation up here and or on the side. You can have some details or a floor plan like this. You can mix and match as many views as you want, and it's at different zoom levels or different scales of the drawing and all the geometry that you've made in model space, okay? So remember I briefly spoke about model space and paper space and model space and layout, okay? So the way to think of it is just that, well, the model tab is model space, okay? And then when you're in one of the layouts, you are in layout mode or also in paper space, okay? Layout is also referred to as paper space by AutoCAD. And viewports allow me, basically, it's like a window that allows me to see while I'm in layout mode into my drawing, okay? My model, in other words. So it's a little bit of a strange thing to get your head around, but that's the way they work. And so it means you can have individual ones set up all over the page. With different views, etc., you know, and you can construct your drawing that way, your final drawing that you'll print. So I've got one viewport in here by default, okay, and we changed the page setup for this. You'll notice that when I made this new drawing file, there was also a second layout, okay. That page setup is only applied to this one layout over here. So just be aware that in order to modify this one, I'd need to change the page setup for this also, or I could create a duplicate of this one down here, okay. Don't worry about that for now. We're just going to focus on one at a time. So this one is now A3. It's got this viewport here. And I can manipulate the size of this viewport by just dragging the grips around like that. But I want you to notice that I have the viewport selected right now because I just clicked on it. And if I hit escape, I'm going to deselect it. So the tools that you use to draw your model in model space are still available here to you in paper space or in layout mode, okay? I can click the line tool and I can still draw lines around like however I need them. And this is important because you are going to do some amount of drawing in paper space, okay? You're going to put all your page information down the side here with your name and your logo and the name of the sheet and the drawing and the revision number and construction notes and your company's logo or contact details, all of that kind of stuff, okay? And then you might put this in a nice little, and then you might put the page in a nice little border or frame or something like that. It all depends on your own personal style, you know, what industry you're in, what company you work for, what are their templates, that sort of thing. And whenever you make all of these changes in AutoCAD, like page setups or setting up styles for something, or you know, you can save all of these drawings as template files, okay? The same way you'd save it as a normal drawing, a DWG file. If you change that selection to a DWT or a drawing template file, you can save it as a template. And it basically functions like a drawing, but when you open it up, you can use that as the basis for all your new drawings, you know, instead of having to reconfigure page settings and all of that thing every time you do a new AutoCAD drawing. So yeah, that's just a tip. Okay, so back to viewports. This is the viewport frame, okay? That's how I select the viewport. But to go inside the viewport in order to modify the contents, to scale this model space, you need to activate the viewport or make it active. And you do this by just double clicking anywhere inside it, okay? So I'm going to double click and you'll see now it's given me this view cube icon has popped up. It's telling me what view I'm currently looking at my model through. So I'm viewing it from the top view, which is correct. That's how I want to see it. And then I've got that familiar navigation pane on the side here that I can use to pan. But just like you did in the model space or the model tab, you can just hold your middle mouse wheel and move the drawing around like that, pan like that. And I can also scroll in and out and just zoom like that. And just take note that as you zoom in and out, you'll see the numbers changing down here on the status bar, okay? That is the scale at which you are viewing this this model right now. So it's giving me some weird numbers right now because it's not a perfectly neat scale. And if I click on it, you'll see all of the scales over here. So we'll go more into scaling shortly, but just for now, understand that this is a window looking into your model space, okay? And I can position the kind of view kind of where I want it like this. And then when I want to deactivate the viewport or go back to paper space, in other words, I don't want my actions to be influencing model space anymore. You just double click outside of the viewport, okay? So we got into it by double clicking inside it. We get out of it by double clicking outside, okay? And if you forget that, another way to do it is to look down here on the status bar, okay? There's a little button that says model or paper space. Right now I'm active in the viewport, so I'm viewing model space, and it's saying model right here, okay? If I click on this, in case I don't want to double click outside, or if I'm zoomed in too far, and there isn't an outside to click on, because that happens quite a bit, you can also switch between view model space and paper space by clicking this icon here. Okay, so there, I clicked it and it took me back to paper space. Now if I want to go into that model again, I can also just click model and it makes the viewport active again. Okay, and there, I double click to get out of it. So we'll look at framing and scaling viewports now. And you'll remember I could scale the size of the actual viewport frame by selecting it, clicking on its grips, and then moving it around like this. Okay, kind of the same way you'd scale a rectangle that you drew. So in effect, you are scaling the viewport frame itself. But if you want to scale the contents, which is what I'm talking about, then you need to make it active, remember, by double clicking inside it. And now remember these numbers at the bottom. Now I can choose a scale for this drawing to appear at. Okay, and this is very important because you have certain scale standards in the industry that make things easy to read. You'll notice that your scale ruler, for example, has a couple of preset scales on it, 1 to 20, 1 to 50, 1 to 100. So those are examples of standard scales. Okay, nobody would put something at a scale of like 1 to 312 or 1 to 16 and a half. It's not a standard scale. Okay, that's why you see that weird number up there at the moment, because I'm dictating the scale by just zooming in and out of my mouse. It's not very precise. Okay, so what I'm going to do though is just center the drawing, because this is the part of the drawing I want to represent. If I decided that this was actually going to be a detail layout and I wanted to have a zoomed in view of the corner of the plan, you can do that too. I'm just going to zoom in like this, and you can see there that I'm isolating the corner of my drawing, and I can use this to then create a detail out of this layout instead of zooming out and viewing the whole plan. Okay, but this is what I want. I want a floor plan for this layout, so I'm going to make sure that my floor plan pretty much fits inside my viewport here. So I'm kind of happy with that. I'm going to check the scale now. All right, I want to make it a comfortable scale that's not too small and not too big that it exceeds the frame of the viewport. All right, so if I go to 1 to 5, you'll see that's much too big. Okay, it's now exceeding the limits of the viewport and actually the page. That's no good. But if I make it too big, let's say 1 to 100, I've got all this empty space around my drawing. Okay, it's just a waste. I could probably put 5 or 6 of these on this page instead of just having one drawing at this tiny puny scale. So I'm going to try and find something comfortable that fills the frame nicely. Okay, that's not bad. 1 to 50. Okay, I think I'll use 1 to 50. It seems like it's a good size, and I can probably still use the space around it to add my dimension. So think ahead. Okay, you're going to need a little bit of free space to annotate and do notes and stuff. So this is a comfortable size. Now that I have clicked down here and selected 1 to 50 from the scale list, if I go back into this area and zoom in and out, it's going to lose my scale. Okay. So just make sure that when you exit the viewport, that when you exited, the scale was set properly at something like 1 to 50 or 1 to 40 or whatever's comfortable for your model and your page setup. Okay, so I'm happy with that. It's set at 1 to 50, so I'm going to double click outside now, and now I'm back in paper space. Okay, so that was a little demonstration of how I basically changed the size of this viewport on the page by moving its grips around, and then how I went inside it and then gave a nice neat scale and framed my drawing nicely, okay, and my composition, if you want to think of it that way. So you saw how easy it was for me to be inside in model space and then to accidentally roll the mouse wheel up or down or zoom or something like that, or pan perhaps, and then my drawing is not centered anymore. It can happen quite easily, okay? So if you want to stop this from happening, you can lock the viewport. So I'm going to just in fact, I think I messed the scale up there. I did. I'm going to set it back to 1 to 50. There we go. I just need to select the viewport, okay? And then you go down here to this little lock icon on the status bar, all right? And just click that, and it goes blue. And that means this viewport is now locked, okay? I can change the shape of the frame like that, but I can't manipulate the contents in here anymore. You'll see that if I try and pan now, it pans the whole drawing, okay? Instead of the model space inside the viewport. And if I zoom, it zooms the whole page, okay? It's making sure that nothing is happening there. And so I'm going to just exit, go back to paper space, and if I want to unlock that thing later because I do want to make a change, I can just click on the icon to unlock it again. Okay, it's pretty simple. I'm going to leave it unlocked for now, and I'm going to go back to paper space. So this time, instead of double clicking, I'll just click down here on the status bar. Excuse me, there we go. So that's the other way to do it. So now let's have a look at putting in multiple viewports. All right, you'll notice that when we started this new drawing, it came with 2 default page setups, and there was already 1 viewport in each. But if I want to get a little bit complicated, not complicated, if I want to get a little bit fancy with my drawing, okay, so you'll see that I didn't zoom in or out here, so I'm still maintaining its scale at 1 to 50, but I'm just moving my viewports around to get a bit of a composition going here, okay. So I've got a plan view over there. Let's say that I do decide I want to put a detail of, let's say, the corner of this wall over here. If I go to the layout tab up here on the ribbon and I go to this button over here, it says insert view. All right, this is one way that will let me capture a new view from a model space and create a viewport around it kind of all automatically for me. So we click on this and it takes me to my sort of model space, all right, okay, through this kind of magical frame. Okay, it's like the door to Narnia. And then it's going to let me, I can still zoom and pan around in this space, and it's asking me to specify the first corner. It's going to let me draw basically a rectangle around the area that I want to now frame in my viewport. So I said I wanted to do a detail in this corner, right? So I'm going to select this corner, draw something kind of like, that's kind of what I want to capture in my viewport. Okay, I'm going to click, and it's going to say, ask me to press enter to accept, enter. And now it's jumped me back to paper space or layout mode, okay, and it's giving me a frame of the viewport that I can just click to place now. There we go. All right, and if I double click in there, it placed it at a 1 to 16 scale. So it chose a nice neat one for me based on kind of the you know, the paper size I had left and that kind of stuff. And I can still double click in this one just like this viewport, and I can zoom in and out of it. This one is locked, so I'm going to unlock it. I can zoom in and out of it like this, and you'll see my scale goes nuts there. But I can always go back to a nice neat one again, like 1 to 16. It was so close, it was almost there. Okay, and then I can I return to models, to paper space, and now I have 2 layouts there. Okay, so the first way we put it in was by clicking that insert view one there. If you don't want to do it that way, a more familiar way to do it is just select the shape of the viewport you want to put in, because believe it or not, you don't have to put in a rectangular viewport. You can actually put in ones that are all different sizes. So you can go up to this button here that says rectangular, and then choose rectangular from the list, okay, the little drop down arrow. And now I can draw a new one over there, and I can put in another one over here, and you'll see that it just automatically puts in a zoomed view of my drawing there. You see it's not to scale this time. So then I could choose perhaps a new detail, like if I want to close up on this lighting symbol for God knows what reason. But let's say I want that anyway. Okay, I can put it at a nice scale as well, 1 to 8. Yeah, something like that. Okay, and if I decide I don't want a viewport, I can just select it the same way I would, you know, a normal drawing object by clicking on it, and then I can hit the delete key. So I'm going to get rid of these viewports. I'm going to show you how to put in another one. Let's try a polygonal one. So if there perhaps is a part of your drawing that you want to show in a viewport, but there's also another part that you don't, and you know you don't want to have to move that away from it in model space, you can put in a polygonal shaped viewport. This is a bit more advanced, but it basically lets me draw it like a polyline, okay? And so I can draw any crazy shape like this. I'm going to hit enter when I'm finished, and there, it's now created a viewport out of that weird shape, all right? And then I can also choose an object to become a viewport. So it's quite common to put detail views. Whoops, I minimized AutoCAD. I can put detail views in using circles, all right? Because circular little callouts are quite popular when doing details. So the way I would do that is I'm still in layouts, but I can still access the home tab and use my normal drawing tools. Okay, so I'm just going to draw a circle onto paper space here, onto my page, in other words. There it is. I'm going to go back to layout on the ribbon here. I'm going to go to this list by clicking the drop down arrow here, and I'm going to select object. And now it's going to say select object to clip viewport, right? So I drew the circle. I'm going to select that as my object, and as soon as I clicked, you'll see it now dumped my model space view inside this viewport there, the circular one. And this is great for you know, zooming in, for example. Sure, it's a bit tight to work in there. Let's say I want to do a little detail of the frame of this door. Okay, I can zoom right into it close like that. Then I can go and put some text next to it that says detail 1, etc. We'll get to annotation in the next chapter, in chapter 10. But there you go. There's a couple of ways to put in multiple viewports, to delete them, okay, and to use different shapes and sizes. So you know, you can go wild with this. It's quite versatile. So there are different ways and approaches to annotating a drawing. When I say annotate, I mean basically add things like dimensions, multi-leaders, which are like little labels, and text, okay? All the drawing and page information that can't be expressed with the actual lines and drawings of the things, okay? Whenever you want to label something, for example, you know, when you see a plan and you see a piece of text that says this is the bedroom, whatever, you know, that text is created separately to geometry and the lines that make up the walls and floors and furniture, all the other things you see in the plan. So one way of doing it is by adding dimensions and text and that sort of stuff in your model space over here, okay? Putting in text over there and pulling dimensions off the edges of this drawing here, and I've just got this sample drawing that I've made here. So you can do all of that annotation in model space here. And I'll give you an example. Let's just quickly throw in a dimension here, okay, and you'll see it's coming out at a very weird scale, okay, and I'll explain this to you just now. If I zoom right in, you'll see there's a tiny little number there showing how long it is, okay, but the scale of this dimension aside, if we go to layout now, you'll see that that dimension that I put in there is showing up. I'm just going to turn the grid off for a second here so that it's easier to see. And if you want to turn off the grid in your viewport as well, just go down to this little icon here. It's the same icon that you use to turn the grid on and off when you're in model space. And so it's the same here too. You just click it and then it will disappear. But then when you go back to model space, it's still there, okay? So so that makes it a bit clearer for me to see, and I'm going to just go in here and pan and move it down a bit, and now you can see there's that dimension there, okay? So I could carry on in this fashion, putting dimensions all the way around this thing, and then, you know, frame that view here in my viewport and see all the dimensions. That's one way of doing it, but it's an old way. And the default way, and the way that makes more sense in AutoCAD, is to do your drawing, okay, the lines that make up the drawing in model space, and then to annotate, in other words, to add dimensions, text, etc., in paper space, okay, in the layout mode. And that's the way that I'm going to teach it in this course. So we don't need this dimension here, okay? We're going to do that another way in the next chapter. And the second thing I want to mention is just about scaling, okay? In particular, scaling of line types. And you remember that when we were first setting up line types as part of our layers, or maybe as part of the properties of an object, we used the global scale factor from the line from the line type settings in other over here, okay? Global scale factor 1. So I think I said something like 12 was a good scale factor, all right? And you'll see that now that I've increased it, these lines look much better to me, okay? If I go to layout now, and you'll see that I zoom in, these things are they look solid here. And yet if I go back to model, I can see the dashing there. I can see this big space and dash in this line going across this area here. And if I go back to layout, well, this one is not even turned on. Let me turn it on there for a second. I'll show you what I did just now by turning that on and off. But the thing to point out here is that this is not dashed like it is in model space, and this one looks solid as well. And this is because of a setting that, well, it's a little bit confusing to explain, and we're not really going to go into it. So I'm just going to tell you the setting to change so that the lines look in paper space the way that they do in model space, okay? So that the scaling of these line types is not messed up. You'll see it looks solid here. It shouldn't be like that. So you're going to type this command, okay? And it's in your notes as well. PS. It's coming up there already. LT scale. Okay. Paper space line type scale. That's what the whole command stands for. So just if you remember that, then just abbreviate it a bit. PS LT scale. Write it on your forehead or something like that. Carry a mirror around with you always. And if I hit enter, it's going to say enter a new value for PT LT scale. Okay. So you can turn it on and you can turn it off. And right now the setting is on, which is 1. And I can tell that because it has it in brackets there. I want to turn it off. So I want to enter 0 as my new value, okay? 0 means off. And then hit enter. And now you'll think nothing has changed, okay? You need to follow this up with another command called regen all. Okay, it kind of just refreshes layout, okay, and it forces it to relook at model and just redisplay anything that's on the screen in case you made any changes. It's like refreshing your view, kind of. It's a weird concept to explain, but just type it in, regen all, okay? You can see it on the screen there and refer to it in your notes. Hit enter, and there, that change that I made to paper space LT scale, okay, changing it to 0. After I typed regen all, it's refreshed it, and now I can see that change. Now my line types match the way that they do in model space, okay? And I set this setting, that paper space LT scale. I set that thing for page 1 Tim, okay, this layout here. If I go to this layout, which is the second, my second sheet, if you want to call it that, I have to set that setting again. So just remember, you have to do it for each layout individually. PSLT scale, enter. See, the setting for this one is 1. I'm going to change it to 0 again, 0. And I'm going to type regen all to refresh my view, and there you go. Now all my line type scaling looks correct between model space and layout. Okay, it looks uniform, so that's good. And the other thing that I want to go back to is how to turn on or off selected layers inside a viewport, all right? Because it's common that you will draw all kinds of information over one plan, okay? It's impractical to have to draw a different plan for every new kind of layer of information that you show. So if you're doing a plan for the plumber, for example, and you want to show the hot and cold water articulation and where the pipe's supposed to go in a floor plan, that's fine. You can draw it on top of one floor plan, okay? Like, let's say I just added this information in here, drew some pipes around the side of this room, okay? And then I want to give a separate floor plan to an electrician to install the switches and the light fittings, okay? But I don't want to show him the plumbing information. It's irrelevant to him. I don't want him to get confused, and likewise I don't want to show the plumber the electrical and lighting information, okay? I could go and make 1,000 copies of this plan, one for the electrician, one for the plumber, one for this, but it would be really impractical. It would take a lot of time, and if I ever wanted to make a modification to, say, the structure of the floor plan, like move a wall, I would have to make that change across all of the different plans that I'd set out, the one for the lighting guy, the one for the electrical guy, the one for the landscaper, whatever, So it's much better to just draw and organize all your drawing information on layers, okay? But when it comes to working in layout and then putting in some viewports and some scaled views, let's say that the first sheet in this set of drawings is going to be the lighting and electrical plan. Then inside my viewport, I want to make sure that those layers relevant to that are showing, and layers that aren't relevant to that aren't showing, okay? It makes it visually clearer and easier to understand. So right now, if I double click in this viewport to make it go active, and I go to this list of layers here from the layers properties, from the layers panel on the ribbon, you'll see that I've got a couple of these settings here, and you should recognize from the layer properties manager, okay? Turning layers on and off, freezing all layers, and then you'll see there's a little option here now called freeze or thaw in current viewport, okay? I don't know who in AutoCAD's development team thought of the terms freezing and thawing, but thawing is like, if you take something frozen out and you let it to just cool to room temperature and not become frozen, it thaws, basically it melts kind of a little bit. So just get your head around those two words, freeze and thaw. It's weird, but essentially you want to freeze that layer inside the viewport. That's how it's not going to be visible anymore, okay? So let's say for some reason I don't want to show the doors and windows on this electrical and lighting plan. Because I've set up my layers ahead of time and I've drawn those objects on that layer, I can go to this little freeze or thaw in current viewport icon, okay? It looks like it's this one right here. And I click on it. You'll see that I'm now hiding that layer inside this viewport. It hasn't deleted it, it's still there in model space, but it's just not displayed to me in this viewport. And I can go and remove all the hatching as well if I think that that's confusing or it's irrelevant. I can also click on that one and then freeze that, okay? And now if I double click back on my drawing here and go back to my paper space, I'm going to zoom out on my page now. You'll see that there's my drawings views, and now I've got this view set up with those elements removed, okay, those layers hidden. And you can always turn them back on by just going back into the viewport, okay, making it active, i.e. doing model space, and then just go back up to this layer list and then unclick that icon or, thaw it. Thaw. Ridiculous. Okay. So that's how you basically select which layers you want to show. And let's say this was for the plumbing guy and I don't want to show him lighting. I can just go to lighting layer and turn it off. Okay, so it's going to be so essential that you understand how this works. So just think of the melted snowmen or skiing in the French Alps or whatever it is that you do to remind yourself of freezing and thawing, because that's how you basically turn layers on and off inside a viewport. All right, and then let's move on to chapter 10. Alrighty.